Ah, welcome to Connect This. I saw this last week camping in I was at up in northern Minnesota, touring the Sudan mine, which is the deepest mine in Minnesota. It was a half-mile underground, and saw this in a thrift store, and I thought of my friend Matt Rantanen, so I'm taking it to him next week.
Sir, this has a name.
Yeah, it's Darth Vader.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure you knew.
So I'm Chris Mitchell with the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, and we are back with a new cast, a first time for this lineup. I'm really excited that we have Blair joining us for the first time on this show, and Robert is back, and so we'll introduce them in a second. But first of all, Kim, welcome to the show.
Chris, I don't even know what to say after that opening of yours, but I am excited to be here.
I think I got Roger to tune in for the whole thing.
Oh boy.
Kim from UTOPIA Fiber. I'm excited. At some point, you're going to come on the show and tell us all about what happened in California with the many different projects that are in the queue that you may get to work on if they get the bid for all of these great rural counties that are putting in. So we have no idea when that's going to happen, but we'll talk about it as soon as that comes down.
That is, I mean, we're all just sitting and waiting. A lot of funding is dependent on some of those projects. So let's see.
Awesome. Travis Carter from USI Fiber, who unveiled his own ACP program this week. How's it going?
It's going well. Sad we won't see you guys in Kansas City at the Midwest Peering Summit next week, but maybe Ruben and the fellows will be there. It'll be fun to hang out for a couple of days. And no, you're not coming, Mitchell?
No, I really wanted to go, and I mean, I'll say that Jay reached out and tried to make it as easy as possible. Asked me to speak on tribal interconnectivity, and I was excited to try to bone up on that to do it. But this is the week. Next week is Jackson's last day of school, and we don't have daycare coverage, so we are going camping to Itasca, the headwaters of the Mississippi, and I will be there instead of in Kansas City. So maybe I'll throw a bottle in the water and it'll make its way down to you.
Nice.
Blair Levin is as an equity analyst and a deep thinker on a lot of these things. One of the more popular guests that we have on Community Broadband Bits. I think that's probably the most famous thing you've done, Blair. So welcome.
I think that's what goes in my tombstone.
Right, no doubt. Multiple time guest of Community Broadband Bits.
That's a lot of etching on a tombstone. Community Broadband Bits. Can you just do CBB?
Yeah, most people know what that is.
Yeah.
Also, Blair just released a multi-part interesting response to questions from people that work with Senator Cruz and Senator Cruz himself, perhaps. And so we're going to talk about Blair's testimony about the ACP, the response to it, and his response to the response. So that'll be a good chunk of today's show, which will then lead into tapping into everyone's brains about how to build a low-income network that will be financially sustainable and actually deliver high-quality access and such things. Robert Boyle's been on before from Planet Networks. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to join you guys. Always really smart people on here who talk about things that we all love, which is broadband and how do we bring more broadband to more people. So
last time we talked, you were doing mostly work in New Jersey. I felt like you were looking at Pennsylvania and in New York. I felt like, and now you have networks in both of those states. Yeah. Maybe you did then. I'm not sure. Tell us the latest.
So we're in the Hudson Valley in New York. We are building in Saugerties, New Paltz, and Kingston, with a lot more to come. And in Pennsylvania, we're building in Stroudsburg and East Stroudsburg and the surrounding areas and counties. And we're working on connecting everything going up through Orange County as well. So
excellent. I still have family friends in Stroudsburg, having grown up in Allentown, and I will send them a marketing note for you.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. Every customer matters.
So as we are about to go live, Kim noted that a fairly interesting piece of news for people that know about the state broadband offices and know one of the more popular folks among them, Jade from Kansas, dropped some news. So Kim, what's going on?
I mean, I don't know, but I read LinkedIn way too much, and it looks like she is out of Kansas. And the way her LinkedIn post puts it is that she was kind of forced out. She basically said in the morning on Tuesday she was taking selfies with the governor, and that in later on that afternoon she had said the wrong thing to the wrong person, and she, I guess, was terminated. What it looks like, I can't say that for certain, but yeah, very interesting. And I mean, Jade was one of the most high profile state broadband directors out there. And the last time I saw her in person, she looked tired and she looked overwhelmed. And I think that this is what we're seeing now from Jade is going to continue. I don't know if they'll get terminated, but I think they'll start leaving. And because people are underpaid and overworked right now. But to lose Jade, who is kind of a really big energy in this space, is a hard loss. But second of all, I want to just put it out there. People keep telling me broadband isn't political. I can't believe that that's the case. I mean, come on, even just with this news, it is absolutely a political game. But
there's a couple of things I wanted to highlight without us spending too much time, without having a lot more information. But one of those is, I think when people say broadband's not political, I think one way to interpret that, the way that I often mean it, is at the local level, stuff gets done without even people considering politics. They're more focused on just how do you resolve this. I think as you get closer to DC and the state capitals, there's a lot of politics involved. One of the things that Jade calls out struck me hard, which was just that, and my wife works for the state of Minnesota, had worked for the city of Minneapolis prior to that. And I do think those people have hard jobs, whether you are appointed or whether you are a staff person. And I think they get too little credit and they have to keep their mouths shut. It's one of the reasons that I feel like I would never do well in that job. Aside from having a different skill set than is often needed, I just have a big mouth. And when we lose people like Jade, I think we are losing a lot, and we need to try to make sure that doesn't happen. Blair, did you want to say anything about that?
No, I'll just say that I had the pleasure of meeting Jade and talking with her a few times. She was great. I also think it's completely correct that all of the state broadband officers are overworked and underpaid. It's really an extraordinary thing, and we could go into this, but why Congress decided to effectively bypass the expert agency, the FCC, and give the task of rural broadband deployment to states who traditionally were, at most, were doing very small scale things to do a very large scale thing. And so all these offices had to ramp up all of a sudden. There are some people doing fantastic work, but it's really hard to do that, particularly when it's not like, departments of transportation that are going to be around and funded for 50 years or forever. Because these broadband offices, it's a pig in a python phenomenon, that they're going to come up and then effectively disappear, or maybe not. We'll talk about that. But the point is, Jade was one of the best, and I'm really sorry to see her go, and would not be surprised to see similar kind of problems emerging from others.
Every now and then, Travis looks up the Wikipedia page for a football or a basketball coach and is horrified at the fact that they're the highest paid state employee. I think, Travis, we've had a text string or two about that. Right. I've long felt that we should have exceptions for certain positions over certain periods of time. I think a person running a state broadband office should command a much higher salary for a short period of time, while we just not to get paid as much as a football coach, not even to get paid as much as a football coach assistant, but maybe to get paid as like an assistant to the assistant, which would be several $100,000 a year, rather than probably, I'm going to guess, 120 to 180 for many of the states right now for that position. So I think it's something that we don't do well in government.
Yeah.
Travis, you unmuted yourself.
Well, I was just so you're thinking that the football coach is more valuable than the broadband administrator? Is that what you're saying?
The economist would tell us yes, based on the fact they're paid more.
Really? Okay. All right.
Perhaps.
Yeah. We sorry, Robert. Blair, Chris and I go back and forth on this about how they pay somebody that throws a ball around millions of dollars, but these other important roles get, I hate to say it, pennies.
Well, can I just make a somewhat serious point, which I won't do much on this show, but
good.
Football produces immediate revenues in terms of television, and broadband produces long-term revenues that are significantly greater than football. but the way economics and markets work is they tend to reward the near-term indirect as opposed to the long-term and the indirect.
Yes. And it's close in the race, but it's a little bit flashier in sports than broadband too.
Yes.
Is it? I don't know. I mean, this is pretty wild stuff, huh?
Okay, we're going to move on beyond the sports, and I'm going to ask Robert to take the lead on the peekaboo, which thank you, Rye, for reminding me. I would have blown right by it. But we have an image. Thank you to David Asp for sharing it with us, and that we're coming into this blind. Okay. I might be able to explain part of this one.
So this is a so sometimes with really important communications, like is a 911 center or a hospital or a really important telecommunications, you take your 110 block and you put it in, and then you put a poisonous snake in there to make sure that no one messes with it.
Right. So this is deliberate, right? I wouldn't want to be the person that comes by with a mouse every now and then.
Yeah, you have to feed it. So someone's probably opening the box to feed the snake so that it doesn't leave.
Right. Yeah.
How old is that snake? Good God. The thing is huge.
They really haven't been doing a good job keeping the old shedded skin out of the box. You need to clean it out once in a while.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's key. It becomes a fire hazard at a certain point, I would imagine.
Yes.
Wow. What is that? Does anyone know? Can you see far enough in to see what is that box? It looks like is those copper wires, I'm guessing, based on the colors and whatnot?
It looks like 110 blocks or something. It's kind of hard to tell.
So what is a 110 box?
Oh, 110 block. Or no, those aren't 110 blocks. Those are screw terminals. Those are screw terminals, and I'm not sure what an AM25T is. Look up Google. Let's see.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm going to guess this wasn't from Dakota County in Minnesota, but it could be. When we talked with folks, sorry, go ahead.
That's a thermocouple. So AM25 is a thermocouple, and so this is some type of heat sensing equipment.
Cool. And it's got a heat sensing animal in it.
Yes. It sensed the heat and went in there.
I mean, this is when I talk with folks at Tohono O'odham, which is the third largest reservation in the United States down in Arizona on the border of Mexico. This is one of those issues where they have to clean out those boxes from time to time. And it's the newest member of the team typically that has those responsibilities, as I understand it. Okay, I don't want to make a correction. I want to correct the fact that I thought I was wrong about something, and it turns out I was right. It's pretty awesome. So the last week we had Alexis on specifically to school us on what are the state obligations under BEAD, and we were discussing whether or not states were required to meet all of the unserved homes, regardless of whether they had enough money to do it in a reasonable way. And it turns out that states do not have to. And so I want to thank Michael Santarelli in particular for writing to me with some more details and noting that they are tracking the number of states. And I believe I should have done more prep, but I believe he said that there are like 12 states that have identified that they don't think they will have enough money to reach all of the unserved. So this is something that I think is important because we don't want to see states end up spending money inefficiently to just try to get something out to everyone, when in fact you could solve the problem for 80% of the population if you're able to just focus on them. So last week we suggested that you had to spend all of the money to connect 100% of the unserved, and that even if you didn't have a good solution, you had to figure out something. States have to have a plan for connecting everyone, and then they have to do their best to meet that plan. But if they run out of money, then they run out of money. So I don't know if that's as clear, but I just want to say that was my understanding from the beginning. Sorry that we confused people. Any comments on that from anyone?
Chris, if I could just ask, I think, but maybe someone else knows the actual answer. I think what you mean is states have an obligation to use the money first to connect all the unserved. The preference is for fiber, but they are allowed for areas, and I think the phrase is extremely high threshold costs or something, where they can use satellite, for example. And I think what you're saying is, because every state could connect everybody by satellite with the money they have. And
Right.
what you're saying is even for there, but some states are going to run out of money before they reach the extremely high threshold area.
Yes. Yeah, that's that's a good clarification of what I was trying to say. So thank you for that. In fact, Blair, if you're around regularly, I think people would appreciate you explaining what I'm trying to say on a regular basis. But the point is, so I was in Montana, and some of the states in the West in particular are going to run out of money before they can touch all the unserved.
That's right.
And if they have to try to figure out a solution for homes that cost $100,000 to bring a low-cost wireless solution to, that would be a terrible waste of money, I think. And that would drag money away from places that could have a decent fiber connection. And so I wanted to clarify that there is, and my understanding is NTIA either is about to or has just tried to clarify that states are supposed to do everything they can, but if they run out of money, it is okay that they do not connect every last unserved person,
Right.
location. All right, let's get into the fun stuff.
So I'm just asking, is there going to be another round of funding after this to connect those people that Travis always
Oh
asks
yeah,
about?
I mean, I just have no doubt about this. Like, there's going to be more money. Some of it might be at the state level, some of it might be at the local level. Like, there will be line extension programs, would be my expectations, to fix the holes that are left from poor mapping. But I don't know, Blair, what you're seeing.
No, well, my view is slightly different, which is this is not a once in a decade program, a once in a lifetime program. It's a once program by which we are attempting as a country to connect everybody to future-proof broadband. If it succeeds, we don't need to do another round. If it doesn't succeed, there'll be so many questions about it. Also, Congress spent a lot of money in 2009. It spent a lot of money in 2021. It will be at least a decade before I think Congress starts to spend money again in this way. Now, the Universal Service Program at the FCC will be spending money, but at a much lower level. And a lot of that money is going to be spent. We can get into what's going to happen with USF, but a lot of that's going to be spent for the OPEX of the final 2% of the companies that will have an operating expense shortfall. So whereas it's true that there will continue to be some money for CapEx, not a lot.
Not a lot, but I think we won't need as much.
No, we definitely won't need as much.
But my sense is that the fact that we know that there are, I don't know the exact number, but it wouldn't surprise me if there are more than 1 million locations that are ineligible for BEAD that need to be connected. States will find some way of trying to fill that gap. There will be some sort of pressure. Robert?
Well, the other thing is that once you build to a lot of these rural areas, and we find this in our own builds, we will build to a rural area. We obviously fill in the lake communities and the downtown areas first, because that's where you get your cash flow that helps pay for the other stuff. But, if you build a bunch of areas and you find that some little offshoot doesn't have service, or it doesn't make sense to build to them now, you don't want to leave those customers on that road unserved. So, you wait maybe 6 months or a year or whatever, and then you get revenue from all the other stuff that you just built, and you use that to build that super rural area that's 10-year ROI.
Or you sell it to private equity and you buy a boat. Travis is not laughing. I'm just going to keep making that joke every week. And when Travis doesn't laugh, I'm going to know that there's something afoot.
No, I tell this over and over again. There's going to be a lot of opportunities to buy networks out there at 10 cents on the dollar when this BEAD money's been spent. So everybody save your nickels now.
We'll see. I think we'll treat that as a prediction that is chicken wingable.
Yeah, and you've kind of been modifying your percentage of the incumbents that are going to go after this money too. Because I was at 99%, you were at like 2%. So where are you?
No, let's check the record.
Kim,
he went, okay, I'll be fair. I think he went up to like 75, 80% last time we talked. But he started at like 30, or something ridiculously low, and he's moving his way up.
Maybe. So one of the challenges is what we define by incumbents. I'm worried about.
Oh no, we don't get to change the rules right now.
I will admit we certainly cannot change the rules, but I will say that there was a point, and then we talked about it in one of the shows, where I realized when Travis says incumbent, he means something different than me. What I'm usually using that as a short form for the big telephone and cable companies, and I am less worried if a mom and pop incumbent in Illinois is getting money to build a network.
Okay. Well,
right.
Aren't you 0-4 on bets so far, if we want to use a sports analogy?
Yeah, no, I'm not doing great.
Okay, all right.
So the smart money bets against you, Chris. That's
Oh yeah.
Every time.
So Travis, you launched the ACP program. What's going on?
So, as we know, this, I really thought this was finally once an amazing government program. We signed up for it. It was incredibly laborious to get on board. We would spend, 20 hours a month trying to put the reports together, only to get audited at a regular basis. So we
You got
decided
audited once. Did you get audited more than that?
twice.
Okay.
So, so when it came to an end, we had all these customers sitting there that, with no fault of their own, were in a pretty good situation financially. So we just decided to continue on and do it ourselves. And if there is another ACP government program, you know what? Everybody else can have it. We'll just keep doing it ourselves. It's much easier this way. The customers are happy, and there's no question if it's going to continue or not. So yeah, we just launched on Monday. It's going okay. We rolled over our 650 customers. I think we're up to 10 additions since then, and we start marketing on Monday. So I'll keep you posted.
So do you mind if I ask what platform you're using for that to vet whether they qualify or not?
Yeah, let's see here. I have a little write-up we did. We more or less, right, let me email this to you. Maybe you can copy it in, what we're doing.
We were looking at something called Sheer ID, but we haven't done anything with them yet.
We're not getting too overly sophisticated. We're basically just saying, are you on any of these qualifying programs? If you are, send us the proof. And what we learned is most people know how to let people know. And so they take a picture on their phone, send it in. And then what we do is we make them requalify every year. So in month 10, we're going to send them an email saying you need to requalify. They'll update the documentation, and we'll keep them going.
Okay. Will you have to requalify the 650 accounts that you brought over?
Yep. Every customer will just requalify every year. So, worst case, somebody's on a program today, they get the low cost, and they're not tomorrow. All right. So they get a year's worth. It's not the end of the world. Robert, the one thing we did do, though, we learned through the ACP thing was we require new people to use our router. Because what happened is we were getting just, somebody would buy something from their neighbor's cousin's next door neighbor. And, it was 2.4 gigabit. And then they blamed us for all their problems. So we just built it into the monthly cost. So we'll give you as many routers as you need to cover your area.
Nice. Yeah, we did is we continued. We're trying to figure out something like build our own ACP program. But in the meantime, we've committed to all those customers that their pricing isn't going to. So it's free now. It's going to continue to be free. If it's discounted, it'll continue to be discounted through the end of 2024. So we've just done that across the board and let everyone know.
No, I think it's going to be wildly successful. We just got to get it out there and let people know. Most of them that we have gotten so far have heard it through word of mouth. Which is funny because we didn't really tell anybody. So, there's somebody talking about it. So,
Blair, were you going to say anything?
Nope.
I saw you on mute at one point. Kim?
Yep.
Nope. Don't have anything to say. Just disappointed that it ended, and grateful that there are providers who are able to continue offering low cost solutions for these people. It's a huge loss for the country that we're even in this situation right now.
Yeah, and I did see that a number of the national companies have continued their efforts. $10, $20, $30 different programs have popped up, and so there are a variety of opportunities that we saw before. We're going to move into a segment now that is sort of focused on Blair Levin's response. Sorry, just like you're not even here. Mr. Levin's response to Ted Cruz's questions after you were at a hearing, Blair, about the ACP and the loss of it. Some of the questions are weirdly antagonistic, and we'll cover that in a few minutes. But one of the things that I thought was interesting was that it didn't seem like it was shared that this was a successful program. Like Kim just was lamenting that it's gone, and it felt like the tone of the questions was more of a gotcha than it's sad that this program has left.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. When I got the questions, my immediate reaction. So I testified in early May. A few weeks later, get 10 questions, and since I was skeptical that any legislation to extend ACP was going to go forward anywhere. I'm thinking, why are they sending me these questions? And then I read the questions and I go, really, why are you sending me these questions? Because there's really only two reasons to ask. One is because you sincerely want to know information that will help you form your view of policy, in particular, how to improve the program. Because Cruz has not said he's opposed to it. What he has said is, it needs to be reformed in a variety of ways, which he has not specifically identified. Though some might argue that some of his amendments to the Cantwell legislation represents that. But the other thing is exactly what you said, which is a bunch of gotcha questions, which is a little bit weird since he asked me no questions when I was there live. If I was going to, as a lawyer, ask someone a gotcha question, I'd rather do it live. But having said that, when I started to read the gotcha questions, I decided to do what I would never advise a client to do, which is to write very lengthy explanations for why, no, you don't got me.
So one of the ones that started was and one that I think is legitimate and that I also want to pick on because I think is useful is do we know if we've spent on the order of between $15 and $20 billion between the EBB and the ACP? Do we know if more people, particularly low-income families, were able to use the internet than would have without the subsidy?
Yes, we do know the answer to that. And the answer is yes. It's very clear. There's a debate about how many. And there are a couple things that I think are important. Number one, in the questions and in some of the analysis that some of the critics have done, they completely ignored the emergency broadband benefit. So, which was the year before, it was a $50 benefit. It was COVID related, but the EBB ramped up the number of people who could get on. And then some people look at the number from when EBB expired and said, see, ACP didn't do that much, but they were starting at the wrong level. So there was a technical error in my view. But the other thing is, there really are three categories. There are those who already were on and were on in a sustainable way, but who are nonetheless low income and benefited from the program, but not because they were able to get on, but because it just helps them generally. There's a second group which were not on, and I think that's about 25%, not on at all, and who were absolutely able to get on. And then there's about 50% of the 23 million homes who were off and on. And I think the goal should not just be to get people who were not on before on, but also to get people on in a sustainable way. And I think that's about 75% of the people. And there were some of the questions that kind of questioned my logic about saying some of the things I did. And I thought those questions were totally legitimate. And I was very grateful that they gave me a chance to explain why I said what I said.
Now, I'm curious, Kim, Robert, and Travis running networks and keeping an eye. Kim, you probably keep a close eye on churn. Do you feel like you saw a reduction in churn during the period of the EBB and the ACP?
I don't think we could really quantitatively say that was a reduction in churn. Our churn is ridiculously low at 2 to 3%. So I can't say anything was ACP contributed, but it could be. I mean, I think what Blair just said, what they didn't calculate EBB is just ridiculous because EBB is the one who got people on the internet in the first place. And ACP kept up those EBB customers on the internet. So yeah, no, I'm like almost dumbfounded, Blair, of like hearing that they didn't even consider that.
No, they didn't. Look, the national expert on this is a guy named John Horgan, and they actually quoted a figure and say, John said this, or they said Mr. Horgan. I refer to him as Dr. Horgan since he is one. He said, it was really only 22%. And I will tell you, my first reaction was, it reminded me a lot of the scene in Annie Hall where Woody Allen is standing in line at a movie, and some guy is talking about Marshall McLuhan. And Woody questions him, and the guy says, well, I'll have you know I'm a professor. And Alan brings in Marshall McLuhan personally, and who starts by saying to the professor, you know nothing of my work. And Alan then says, God, I wish life was like this. I actually contemplated doing a little video with John, starting with Dr. Horgan, with him saying to the Cruz staff, you know nothing of my work. And then, basically John and I together, and though it's my responsibility, explained why they were taking that one data point completely out of context And they really should focus on the totality of what Dr. Horrigan has said. And then you have a very different answer.
Marketing people, Blair, they just can take data and present it however they want to really prove their point. Which,
well, look, I mean, as I said to them, what you're doing is you're taking a snapshot. And if you look at the snapshot before and you look at the snapshot after, you get a very different picture. But, that was a question, though, that I thought was quite legitimate. And I was happy to answer it. And hopefully the data helps those who want the program to continue to support either the extension or bring it into the context of universal service or in some other way.
And I do want to spend some time having some fun with the people who deserve it. I think it can be hard at times when you're dealing with critics who there's two camps. One is they're not serious and they'll say anything, and trying to respond to them is trying to nail Jello to the wall. And then there's another camp who are people who are seriously questioning. They might be just generally have a lot of questions and like to see the hard evidence. I think Rye is in that camp, and sometimes I'm a little bit antagonistic towards academics who fall too far into that camp to the beyond all reason. But I do want to get at this and note that the ACP made a big difference, and I'm particularly, and Claire, you called this out on tribal lands. But before we do that, I want to see Travis and Robert. And Travis has spoken in favor of the program. Robert, you're continuing the program. Like, obviously, it seems like from your perspective, it makes a difference for your customers.
No, it absolutely makes a difference for customers, and just morally and ethically, it's such a small percentage for our customers. You just can't, oh, sorry, you can't afford it, you don't get internet anymore. It's just not the right thing to do. And so, we have talked to several of them. I mean, I talked to a couple personally, but I know our staff has talked to them, and we said, does this make a difference between you being able to afford service and not? And, enough of them said yes, that we said, okay, well, we'll figure something out. And that's why we decided to extend it but what was said earlier before with the EBB was $50 a month. That paid 100% of the cost initially before we even had a lower cost program. And that was during the pandemic when everyone's working from home, everyone's in school from home. So you had a huge uptick in people getting better broadband at that time. And then obviously they just kept it through ACP. So I don't know who went through the EBB stage and didn't use that benefit, if they knew about it, who would then later on say, oh, well, now COVID's over and we're all back to school and back to work, but now I need high-speed internet. It just doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm. Travis?
Well, remember, ACP is like one of the only programs we've ever been able to participate, because we build in a metro, in a city. Even though there's a ton of need in a city, we don't qualify for any of the other government programs that are out there. But I'll give you this, which I found was interesting when I was looking at the data. ACP, we had a nice uptake, and then even when ACP ended, there was some months in there where a high percentage of our customers reverted to our normal price tier. 99% of them paid the normal price tier and just kept going. So once they had reliable broadband, they kept it and paid for it until at a program.
So for some number of your customers, they were ACP and they were getting either discounted or free service, and then you began charging them and you saw that they were paying that.
Yeah, attrition was almost nothing. So it's kind of an interesting thing where, if people get online and they have a high quality service and they start utilizing it, this small group of people continue to pay for it, and now they qualify for our new ACP program, so they're back down to a lower dollar amount. But
you are not alone in that. I also I'm a Wall Street analyst, and one of the interesting things has been that the ISPs have been telling people like me and others on Wall Street that fundamentally what the government did was it paid for a 2-year promotional program, and it was fantastic, and that they don't think that many people will drop off. But that's a big question mark. I mean, and if we see very little drop off, then I think it'll be very inexpensive to come up with a new ACP program. If we see a lot of drop off, then it'll be different. But, one of the questions I was asked was about private sector responses, and I'm a big fan of them. And I actually had a role in the early days of Comcast Internet Essentials, and I think they're great. But I would just want to remind people, as I reminded Senator Cruz's staff. We don't treat low-income medical needs by depending on the charities of wonderful charities, right? Wonderful hospitals who do charity. We don't depend on connecting everyone to food. We have a SNAP program, but we don't depend on community soup kitchens. So, I mean, on some things you really need the government. I think this is one of them for the reasons I lay out. But that's not to in any way criticize the private sector efforts. And it's a big unknown as to how successful they will be getting on. Because really, June will be the first month where there's no support of the government for low-income broadband subsidies.
But I think what you're starting to see is that people, like what Travis just said, that people weren't dropping off, and what you just said is that we're like people are still getting it. It's that this is a necessity for people. So maybe yes, that people are not dropping off, Travis, but what are they giving up because of that they're paying the bill? And I think that is a conversation that people aren't having because people cannot live in these days and times without internet and be functional.
Well, and I do want to add on to one thing that Blair said, which is not only do we have a sense that it wouldn't work to depend on soup kitchens and volunteer hospitals, we've run the experiment. Like humanity has done this many times. There's a reason we developed those programs, flawed as they might be. They are a response not to a hypothetical issue, but to people dying of poor health care and not having horrible lives from malnutrition and things like that. And so I just like to remind people sometimes that like we have done this in the past. And if you look back and you read a biography of someone born in the late 1800s, and they experienced the difference between their early part of their lives and the lighter part of their lives, it's significant.
Was that during the Woodrow Wilson administration, or was that a different one?
It just so happens that it did touch on the Woodrow Wilson administration.
Always Wilson.
Okay. I haven't read Alexis's question here. Do folks have thoughts about the fact that many state level grants relied on the ACP for cost modeling? And so you've got a bunch of people that have accepted money and soon will accept money to build in areas under assumptions that they would be getting on the order of $350 per year of subsidy to make sure they had more customers in these areas. So it's pretty significant.
Absolutely. By the way, one of the questions I was most astonished by during my testimony, I said that it is an absolute fact with mathematical certainty that if we get rid of ACP, there will be a number of locations in Texas that will not get fiber, but instead will be forced to take either fixed wireless or satellite. That is an absolute certainty. And they asked me to explain actually do the math. So I went through and I did the math. Why would you ask me to do that? For one thing, I'm not that good at math, but even I can do the math. And, so I can't remember what the number was, but it's tens of thousands. Why does Ted Cruz want to know the precise number?
Yeah,
it's an absolute certainty.
Well, some of the questions really, really betrayed that. We'll get to my favorite in a second, as well as a couple of your footnotes. But I'm curious for people's, I think the issue is like it's one of deep frustration, and I don't understand the law as well as I hope you do, Blair. But they are required to take part in a program that doesn't exist anymore. And I kind of wonder if the actual wording of this is going to come into play as they struggle with it. Now, we know that, for instance, CTC up in Minnesota, and I always use them because I think they're a wonderful local ISP that does everything they can. They built out to Bois Forte, which is a tribal reservation. Many of the people on Bois Forte were able to take service at $75 a month because of that subsidy. But CTC, as a co-op that doesn't have like vast reserves of profits to rely on to dig into, they can't just like slash the $1 million salary of the executives in order to make it happen. They can't provide that service now. And so people don't have service. But at the same time, like, we've paid public money to build that network.
It's a big problem. I mean, the loss of ACP has significant administrative problems, legal problems, but the biggest problem is it raises the cost that BEAD will have to pay to connect everybody because you're losing a bunch of revenue.
One of the things that suggested that they were not entirely serious when they were asking you questions is they asked, and this is a quote, Do you agree there are harmful effects of too much screen time? And this is the sort of thing that I want to plaster on billboards across Texas for his reelection campaign. He is more worried about whether or not kids have too much screen time than whether kids in rural areas can access the internet at all.
Yeah, I was a little astonished by that question.
You wrote perplexed. Perplexed.
Yeah, I was perplexed by that question. Look, I actually gave a speech that was partly about that topic 15 months ago. They obviously didn't do much research on me, but I don't blame them for that. But my more serious point was society is always wrestling with new technology and the costs and the benefits. As I pointed out to them, cars kill 40,000 plus people a year. We do not ban them. We try to make them safer. There's medicine that saves lives, but is also really destructive to certain people. We don't ban the medicine. We try to make the distribution of it safer. And so here, and I pointed out, and by the way, pro tip, I only cited Republican states. I looked at the states of Florida, Ohio, and Utah and said, these are states which are trying to address the problem of too much screen time. And they're doing it in different ways. At the same time, they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars of getting educational technology into the classroom. So the kids are spending time in the classroom on screen time. Now, is that hypocritical? No. That's just trying to do what we always have tried to do, which is to balance, get as much of the pros as possible and diminish the negatives as much as possible. That's what we should do. And this notion that it's kind of all one or the other, I mean, I actually had an answer. I cut back a lot on my sarcasm in the answers. But Cruz himself has sponsored various legislation to do the very thing I'm talking about. And they seem to be unaware of their own point of view on it. But I didn't include that because I thought.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a serious body anymore. And that's what I think I find really frustrating. I want to move on to a question about how we're going to build networks and what kind of things we can do. So we're going to put Robert, Travis, and Kim more on the hot seat here. But as we're coming out of it, I did want to note, one of the things that I think about, which is ACP put about $360 per year into the pockets of people, of 20 million households, or in order to try to make sure that they had decent internet access. And the question for a government program should be, what did we get back from that as a society? And Blair, in your writing, you cited multiple examples in which, in different studies, you could have gone on much longer. I'm sure you did, and then you cut it back. Just noting that what we know from telemedicine is that probably we had, and these are my words, but we probably had more than an average of $360 of benefit just from telemedicine.
Right.
We probably had more, I would say we probably had more than $360 per household of benefit from educational opportunity, from economic opportunity, from any number of other things. And so you have cited a whole bunch of studies. And so one of the things that I think people might enjoy doing is just looking through some of those to remind themselves of this. And the part that I find really frustrating, this is not just like making fun of people I disagree with, but there's a lot of people who don't appreciate the power of a multi-purpose or platform technology, and the way that it just doesn't generate revenue directly, but it enables everything else to be more effective.
Yeah. No, actually, I had a wonderful dialogue with Senator Vance at the hearing on this question about the general purpose technology.
I refuse to believe that.
Yeah, I know. It was a little bit surprising, but no, Senator Vance has been very good on this issue. And it was, that was, to me, the best part of the hearing. But there's both a policy point, which is not only can we save money, we should be designing the program to save money more, but there's also a political point. And if I may be so bold, I think the argument, and I've been in discussions with the White House and the FCC and others about this, the argument that we need to continue ACP because poor people will be hurt in this political context is not a winning argument.
Well, we know that
if you cut ACP, you're going to raise the cost of Medicaid, could be a winning argument. And so I have been trying to do the latter. I just think that if we're trying to get it through a Republican House and a basically split Senate, the argument about how government will cost more and be less effective if we cut ACP can be a political winner.
Yeah.
And I would just like to let you know yet another reason that it is still political broadband, very political, that we're having to kind of be creative of how we get things through Congress because of how political it is. That's my point of the day.
We ran the experiment. the people tried to make an argument just on the basis of we got to help poor people, and don't have an ACP anymore. So I very much agree. We need to ground our arguments in things that will move people. I did a whole show with Harold Feld about this, about public policy. It's not about convincing people to act the way you want them to act or think the way you think. It's to get them to do what you want them to do. And to do that doesn't mean cajoling them with what makes the most sense to you.
Yeah.
We're going to move on. And so I want to ask, Robert and Travis in particular about their thoughts of how to open up a conversation about, you both operate networks. I know that Kim does as well, but Kim just spoke. So I'm going to ask you both, what would we need to do to try to make sure that we could have a high quality network connecting the people that you're struggling to connect in Minneapolis, Travis? Think about Phillips or North Minneapolis. And I don't know your territory as well, Robert, but what sort of help could be done that would be a decent program to make sure that we were getting fiber networks run by good companies out to people, and that they would meet their needs?
Travis, you want to go first? You want me to go first?
No, go ahead, because this is the question I keep posing to Mr. Mitchell in a much simpler fashion of how do you build high quality networks and generate very little revenue off them?
Mm-hmm. So to me, the number one factor is long-term, low-interest financing. That is with an almost unlimited pot that will get paid back, and you can cycle through it over time. But that to me is the biggest hurdle. Now we're in a really good position. We have a wonderful bank and we have access to lots of capital now. But for the first 5 years, when I could have built way easier than we can now, because there's the incumbents are starting to build and there's other competitors starting to do things, but having access to capital is huge, and it doesn't need to be grants. It doesn't need to be a gift of any kind. It just needs to be access so that we can make a business case to build in areas where the ROI is 10 years. And if you have,
what about
financing.
Do you have areas where the ROI is not? Where there is not one, where the cost of collections, the cost of security, the cost, the lower take rate will result in you just not being able to turn a positive. If you were building out to Camden, in the harder neighborhoods.
Sure. So the biggest problem in a metro area where you have apartment buildings, HUD can do more than anything the FCC will ever do. And that is, if you take money for Section 8, you must allow providers in the building. And if they don't do that, the only buildings that don't have coverage that are low income are the ones where the building owners do not give whatever, I'm not going to swear, but whatever, they do not care at all because their tenants are not their customers.
And you're not talking about public housing. You're talking about anyone that accepts money from HUD, which is many, it's almost every location in some of these
public
areas.
Housing, they're wonderful. They love working with us because they care about their residents and they want to serve their residents. It's essentially the slumlords who have, 100, 200, 300 unit buildings that they're collecting their Section 8 money, and they do not care whether we're in there or not. And just having a conversation with us is a waste of their time, and they don't want to. And so all they have in a lot of these buildings is horrible old coax infrastructure, or in many of them, all it is copper, and they can get DSL. And so the most vulnerable populations don't have access. And we're literally in front of the building. We want to bring fiber in. We charge the building owner nothing. And we have people in there who want to pay us for service and can't get it.
I'm so glad you said that, because it collides headlong into the answer that Travis and I have come up with. And I think Blair and Kim will both appreciate this, which is, I think Travis and I would say bulk deals, in which you make sure that you can get paid for every unit from the owner and you lock out the others, which is the opposite of what you just said in some ways. And it's not to say that you're wrong, but that these problems are freaking hard to figure out what the right balance is. So Travis, I want to give you a chance to jump in.
Well, and I thought it was interesting what Robert said, because we see the exact opposite here in Minneapolis. The public housing, they don't care at all about having competition inside the building. It's the low income homeowners, property owners, they'll let us in every time. So see, it's not so here in Minneapolis is different than where you're at. I mean,
But Travis, are you saying that like a small MDU lets you in every time for like those buildings, or
private owners will let us into the building, but the government owned buildings, we're not in a single one. And we've had fiber out in front of those buildings for 14 years. So going back to Kim's political thing, it's all political. And I disagree with you at the local level, Chris. Everybody in government has a political edge to them. And there's nobody driving this, no matter how many times you beg or say, hey, we can provide a better deal. Honestly, I hate to say it, they don't care. And I don't know about broadband. Let's say about broadband. They probably have 50 other issues they're dealing with, and broadband doesn't even make the top of the list.
Yeah, I think it's a very good case, Travis. I would restate my earlier claim that the local level is not political to say in some circumstances, which makes it meaningless.
It's
He's always changing the rules.
Yeah.
Chris is always changing the rules. Okay, keep going, Chris.
I learned it from my son. We play a lot of games together. Robert, you were going to jump back in, I think. And then Blair.
So small MDUs are fine, like 6-8 units, no problem. Those people want us there. HOAs, no problem. It's absentee landlords who own apartment buildings where they're not there. They've probably never even been to the building. They have like a local super who takes direction from their headquarters management office, and they're just like, you have to call these people, and these people are like, no, we're not interested in. And in some of those cases, they have a bulk deal. Like one of the buildings I can think of has a deal with Gigamonster, which I think is now in Chapter 11. But I think they ran a dedicated 100 meg connection to the building for 200 apartments, and they had a 100 meg lumen connection. And we have fiber in front. We want to give them access. Can't do it. So,
Blair,
I was just going to add, the bulk billing question is actually in front of the FCC in March. The chair announced that she was going to address the question of bulk billing and whether it should be banned or something like that. Certainly a step back, and her more recent comments suggest that she's starting to see that perhaps there are multiple sides, and the record is there definitely are some, like the Harold Feld, who you mentioned earlier, are supporting what you might think of as an opt-out, but there are a lot of mayors and a lot of public housing folks who and traditional allies of assisting low-income housing who are saying bulk billing is the only way we lower rates for low-income folks. So it'll be interesting to see what the FCC does with that one.
And I filed a comment for that FCC saying that though we are open access, we do not agree that there should be a ban on bulk billing, because we feel like there should be that, first of all, private owners should be able to do what they want with their own buildings. Should they be more equitable? Absolutely. I'm not saying they shouldn't, but opening up the doors into MDUs doesn't mean that every provider is just going to run in and invest in those MDUs if there is a bulk rate for 5 years in there too. There's some that will, but most probably will stay away.
And that's why I said it has to be tied to HUD. So you can't, it's property rights. If it's my building, I can do what I want. But if you're taking money from the federal government, then you have to apply, you have to have, fire protection. You have to have all the other rules with HUD. You have to allow open access to the building.
Travis, how did you respond to Robert's suggestion that a lot of the problem could be solved with long-term low-interest capital?
Well, that is a spot-on scenario there. I mean, we went from 4% to almost 9 to 10% on interest rates in the last year and a half. I mean, it's if this keeps up, it's there's no way you're going to be able to do areas that are tough to quantify the return.
Well, could you build North Minneapolis at 4% if you had a guarantee of being able to borrow that for some number of years?
Well, let's see how successful this ACP program is. So, because if we can get successful with ACP and generate revenue off there, and let's say we had 4% capital, then there is probably a model that makes sense.
So you could, with sufficiently low and secure capital that you could plan around, even at a reduced take rate, you're just trying to cut your losses as opposed to actually trying to figure out how to make a profit.
Yeah, I mean, this interest environment is, I mean, it's hard to explain how difficult it is to operate in. It's compared to where it was just a year and a half ago. I mean, whatever the reason they've done this, a lot of us small operators are, we're significantly impacted. Our builds are smaller.
Yeah, on a previous show, I believe you said that it's on the order of $500,000 at a minimum is what you've cut back.
Yeah, of just interest. Yeah, I mean it's unbelievable.
I think the interest rates have stopped a lot of the progress in the broadband field right now. I think what I've seen is that people are not going forward with their broadband project, or they're waiting for interest rates to go down, hopefully, which I saw the EU reduce theirs today. So the reserves might be reducing ours, or they're waiting for the BEAD money, which who knows what's going to happen with that. So yeah, I think the high interest rates have really impacted how much fiber is being put into the ground right now.
I'd say Robert's right. That's the number one issue above and beyond everything else is your cost of capital.
I mean, the thing that always comes to mind that I want to ask Blair is I've heard it talk of an infrastructure bank since before I knew what a bank really did or what infrastructure actually was.
Yeah. No, I actually, my former boss, Reed Hunt, he and I both served, but in different capacities, in the Obama transition team, and he made a big presentation to try to put an infrastructure bank in the what was passed in February of 2009. He and Larry Summers had a great debate about it, and Summers disagreed, and Summers won. And I think that was the last opportunity.
He so often did.
Pardon?
He so often did, and I'm not going to say he was always wrong, but pretty frustrated.
Well, I think if you read my Reed's book entitled "A Crisis Wasted," available on all good bookstores and on Amazon,
highly recommed. I really enjoyed it as well.
I mean, it does tell the story, and Summers is a very smart guy, but I think Reed was absolutely right.
We're about to lose Travis, and then we'll wrap up with one or two more notes about ACP. Travis, anything else you want to include?
No, sorry, I got to hop off. Ironically, we have a conversation with the bank. So, and Kim, you said the EU just lowered their
I saw it come across the EU. So they said that the Fed reserves probably will reduce ours as well.
Yeah, but let's be clear, 25 basis points isn't going to matter.
Right. Well, I think the question is we're all in over our head except for maybe Blair, but probably Blair too. The question is, how does the market respond after a small reduction? And that might give us a better sense of where things will go in the future.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but the market doesn't affect our Robert and Kim and I borrowing. So,
right. But I mean, I think the question is, if we see like, if things get too hot with a small reduction, then we will not see much more of a reduction. Is the concern.
I doubt we see much through the end of 25. I mean, realistically, the way things are going. So, but
yeah, I mean, I just gotta think that, like, if you talk to a state or a city that had the ability and they task them, what does it take to build North Minneapolis? And you say, well, we need a loan at this rate or something like that. Like, it's not as hard as people might think to actually like figure out how to do something like that. Well, it's not like you need to give $1,000 to every family.
No, we have had those conversations and they just go off into the ether. So we'll see. We'll see. Really the key for us is, if this ACP program that we've launched is successful, and let's just say we could add 3,000-4,000 people onto it, that's good cash flow that we could then reinvest that money into other areas. Mm-hmm. So that's really kind of what we're hoping that happens out of this. So
just to be clear for people, you build a fiber network, your operating costs are such that just getting some level of cash flow from certain aspects is just far better than getting zero from those households.
Well, sure.
The network's already built.
Yeah, you've already have the bypass costs done. So
yeah. And I don't know, Travis, we always say 80-20. 80% of our cost is to build in front of somebody's home. Yeah. 20% is to connect them.
You are 100% spot on. Thank you all. Appreciate the time.
Travis.
So one of the things I wanted to note is that if you read anything from Blair, don't skip the footnotes. I did the math quick, and Kim is the youngest person on here, and I don't know exactly how old Blair is, but according to some economists, we are roughly the same age. All of us, right, Blair?
Yeah, that's right. Though that another one of the questions that I couldn't believe they were asking me this. I cited, literally dozens of studies. There was one study that had a problem. And I was grateful that they brought it to my attention. I don't actually think it was that big of a problem. It was a problem. And then they asked, well, should Congress rely on problematic studies like this? And the reason why I was astonished that they asked me that question was they 100% relied on a study that said the ACP program caused inflation. Now, there are so many problems with that study, but it allowed me to say, you're making a really good point. Congress should be very vigilant in looking at the studies that are cited in these things. And oh, by the way, the study that you cited, it has a few small problems. And then I went into details about what the problems are. But one of them, by the way, is that they regarded $50 and $30 as being similar, which I think that's what you're referring to.
Yeah.
I don't really think they are similar, at least from an economic perspective.
A
But it had a lot of
67%,
other problems.
right? A 67% variance.
Yeah.
Also, there's a problem with causality, which allowed Blair to make a reference to a certain John Connor series. So.
Yeah. So the methodology of the study that they cited, which has so many big problems, and I'm going to just focus on a small one. It appeared that he attributed the rise of prices in 2022 to enrollment in 2023. Now, as I said, I am not an economist, but I am pretty sure you cannot say that a future event caused a past occurrence, except, of course, in the movie The Terminator, which is what the reference was. But
yes, and it's a solid reference in that I feel like Annie Hall, I wonder how many people had seen it.
Right. No, I'm definitely showing my age there, which is significantly higher than your age, except to this one economist.
Right. So Robert and Kim, I'm curious then, where do you think we will be in 4 or 5 years in terms of, do you feel like we will be in a situation in which we have a higher quality ongoing discount for low-income families, as well as something to actually connect a different program, perhaps, to try to make sure that they're connected?
Kim, do you want to go first?
I'll go first. Isn't this what we call USF reform?
Oh, it could be, but I mean, this is leaving open the possibility that it would be some other things. I mean, I think some of us thought USF might have been reformed by now.
I think that nothing else is going to get passed until we reform USF. I think that is going to be the crux of the situation, because USF is out there, it's dying, something has to happen to it. So is that going to be a broadband tax? And is that going to be our new USF? I think you're going to see more of that movement, but there's always going to be a low income program. But I think it's going to be reimagining what is already there than a new one, personally.
Let me plug the Community Broadband Bits podcast, which had Mike Romano on it. And we just talked about some of the aspects of this and the politics around that. So if people haven't heard that, that would give you a little more depth on what Kim just brought up. Robert?
I think that you're going to see over the next 6 months that things like, the ACP program that was created in Minnesota, and what we're doing and what other companies are doing to try to come up with, kind of private solutions, because we want to connect everyone. We've already paid to connect, to go in front of their houses. So let's try to get as many of them as connected as possible. It's just good business to do that. In more rural areas where you've gone by 5 houses in a mile or 2 houses in a mile, getting a minimum amount and subsidizing it is not going to work. So you're going to have some type of subsidy for those areas to have them make sense. And I think part of that is based on the customer mix of the company. So if you have more, suburban and rural areas together, then you can kind of, dollar cost average what you're getting in, even if you're operating some parts of your network at a loss, which is what we do. And that's fine. It's just part of the deal. But then you'll also have areas where it's purely rural, and those areas you're going to have something in, like what Kim said, the USF reform, where you have a dying service that nobody really uses anymore. Subsidizing another dying service that nobody really uses anymore is probably not the solution. So
Blair, I feel like the question for you is, muddle through. Will we still be muddling through at that point, or will we have had a more significant solution?
So if you'd asked me 4 years ago, I would have said sometime in the next 4 years, we will actually reform universal service. The contribution factor doubled under Ajit Pai, who never talked about it once until he was like walking out the door saying, oh, by the way, we probably need to deal with universal service. The Congress asked the FCC to do an analysis of what is the future of universal service after the BEAD program. And I know the FCC staff very well. They're capable of extremely good work. The response was not extremely good work. And that study is just not at all relevant to the current discussion. There is an important discussion going on between Senators Lujan and Thune and a bunch of others to present a bipartisan universal service reform package. I think it's tricky, but I think regardless of the election results, it is certainly possible because there's a bipartisan interest in it. And while everything is political, I agree with that, it doesn't fit in the neat packages of kind of liberal conservative. So I do think we'll get universal service reform, but I would be the first to say, you know, whoever does it, it's a politically difficult thing. And I don't see people having a lot of political capital and courage to do that kind of thing. They're not going to do it in a presidential election year, but hopefully next year they'll actually be able to do it.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. And I feel like, I guess the thing I'll just wrap up with is, in my mind, the uncertainty is where anything can happen. And so I am never in the situation where I'm like, oh, we'll definitely just be muddling through this forever. At some point, something will change, often due to something that one did not expect causing it. So, so I have hope. We're going to be drawing to a close. It's been, I think, a really a good show, bringing together important threads around affordability and how to move forward and what might actually move the needle. So I appreciate your comments, Robert, Blair, and Kim. I'm glad we finally got rid of Travis. I think the show's been a lot better since then. We miss you, Doug. Hope you're doing well. Look forward to bringing you back on in about 2 weeks, I hope. Thank you, Rye, for producing. And, it's been another fun hour and 10 minutes of Connect This.